The Yreka Western Railroad is an 8.86-mile-long short line running from Yreka, California to Montague through the pastoral Shasta Valley. Chartered in May 1888 as the Yreka Railroad, the line was completed into Montague in 1889, where it connected with the Southern Pacific, favoring a shorter route through the Shasta Valley, bypassing Yreka and going through Montague. The citizens of Yreka were without a railroad when the Central Pacific came into the area. Old Betsy, a Baldwin 242T built in 1888, was the only locomotive that the little railroad out of Yreka ever purchased new, and by 1898 the roster expanded with larger engines such as number 2, a 440 built by Cook in 1886 that was purchased second-hand from the Corvallis and Eastern. Much like the mainline railroads, as the trains got bigger and heavier, the power got larger. In 1933, the Yreka Railroad was reincorporated into the Yreka Western Railroad Company. In 1935, the railroad went into receivership, and after using leased SP060s throughout the 30s, the railroad was able to purchase 262 number 9 in 1939. After being sold to the Amador Central in 1942, the railroad purchased a pair of ex-San Francisco State Belt 060s, which became the backbone of the railroad during World War II. By 1953, the need of a larger engine to replace the two worn-out 060s was evident. And again, the railroad turned to the McCloud when they purchased 282 number 19, affectionately known as Pancho. By 1956, railroad businessman Willis Kyle purchased the Yreka Western as his first railroad. In an effort to increase business for the railroad, he also purchased 600 acres of land adjacent to the line and offered it for development to any industry that wanted it as long as they shipped via the Yreka Western. Due to the proximity of Goose Nest Mountain to the railroad in Montague, Willis Kyle came up with the Blue Goose logo, and thus the association of the Blue Goose and the Yreka Western Railroad was forever intertwined. And by 1956, with traffic increasing, the railroad again went shopping and turned to the McCloud and purchased 282 number 18. With most railroads in the West having been done with steam by the mid-50s, the Yreka Western became popular in the railfan community as it was one of the few railroads that still ran steam on a regular day-to-day basis. It is March 18, 1961, and we see the number 19 making up its train in Yreka for a run to Montague. The 19 climbs Butcher Hill as it heads out of Yreka. At Montague, it'll pick up a flat car and a coach for a fan trip run back to town. Number 19 starts to stretch its legs on the final sprint into Montague. Number 19 was Baldwin's 42,000th locomotive and was constructed in April of 1915. The 90-ton Mikado was built as a coal burner and was built for the Caddo and Choctaw Railroad in Arkansas as their number 4 and given the name R.L. Rowan. After about 5 years in Arkansas, the 19 went south of the border when it was sold to the Silla de Real del Monte y Pachuca Railroad as their number 105. It was during this time period that the locomotive was converted to oil. In 1924, the McCloud River Railroad was shopping for motive power and purchased number 105, and it became their number 19. The cab of the 19 was full of bullet holes when it arrived on the McCloud in 1924, and due to this, the shop crews at the McCloud gave the engine the nickname Pancho. Stories started that the 19 had a run-in with Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution. However, the only issue is that we have to follow history by a timeline for a reason. The revolution ended before the engine ever got to Mexico. However, the affectionate nickname of Pancho has stuck. Number 19 gets serviced and the 18 is added to the train at Yreka, where it will be hauled dead in consist as far as East Lick Mill, simulating a doubleheader for the fans. Number 18 was built new for the McCloud by Baldwin in November 1914 and was thrusted into the public eye shortly after being completed when it was on display at the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco in 1915. The engine returned to the woods after the festivities in San Francisco and was retired by McCloud in 1955. This former stablemate to the 19 was purchased by Willis Kyle in the Yreka Western in 1956. Number 19 makes quick work of the fan trip consist on the final sprint to Montague. A snow-capped Goose Nest Mountain and Mount Shasta can be seen overlooking the Shasta Valley. The Shasta Wonderland was a dual excursion on the McCloud and the Yreka Western sponsored by the California-Nevada Railroad Historical Society. The Yreka Western segment had number 18 and 19 double-heading with the fan trip from Montague to Yreka on May 24, 1964. 18 and 19 run light to Montague to pick up the fan trip consist. The 19 is now leading tender first as the fan trip consist leaves Montague heading back for Yreka. Yreka, the two engines run around to the other end of the train. The 19 backs on and will continue to be on the point for the doubleheader. The first diesels arrived on the Yreka Western in 1958, and by this time the 18 and 19 were both kept in standby service. The doubleheader crests the summit of Butcher Hill at the east switch of Hilltop Siding. The 19 and the 18 smoke it up for a photo run-by at the bottom of Butcher Hill. The doubleheader coasts down into the flat farmland of the Shasta Valley. A stray cow is whistled off the line as the doubleheader makes its final dash into Montague. At Montague, the fan trip consist is interchanged back to the SP for the run back to Oakland. The power is a mixed bag of Scarlet and Gray and Black Widow with this ABA set of FP7s. After the interchange is complete, the 18 returns light to Yreka. Shortly after this trip, the engine would suffer a blown cylinder that would put it out of service until it was purchased by McCloud in 1998. The 19 works the SP interchange at Montague. The railroad owned 2 tracks behind the SP depot. Here at Hilltop Siding, the 19 runs around its tank car for the return trip to Yreka. It was a standard practice for them to run tank cars on the point on the return trip back from Montague. The tank cars were for Standard Oil Company of California, which had several decent-sized plants in Yreka. With the tank car on the point, the 19 steams out of Hilltop Siding to go switch Standard Oil. The train rolls into Yreka and prepares to spot the tank car at Standard Oil. The crew finishes their switching in Yreka before tying up for the day. In 1970, Willis Kyle purchased 50% interest in the Oregon Pacific and Eastern Railroad, which ran along the Roe River from Cottage Grove to Diston, Oregon. In 1972, the 19 was transferred from the Yreka Western to the OP&E, and in 1973, the engine hit the big screen in its most famous motion picture role, Emperor of the North. It's a year after the 19's famous role in Emperor of the North, and after getting a ticket to ride the train at the depot in Cottage Grove, a view of the water tower shows all the hobo markings still left over from the movie. The 19 arrives into Cottage Grove with its excursion consist. The banner on the side of the tender is to welcome the rail fans of the Northern California Railroad Club who have come to ride the next trip to Diston. Before Kyle Railway sold their interests in the Oregon Pacific and Eastern in the mid-1980s, the 19 had one more movie role, when the filming of Stand By Me in 1985 had it avoiding an attempted train dodge, and with the theatrical release of the movie in 1986, the engine was once again seen on the big screen. This cut was made famous by Emperor of the North when A No. 1 and Cigarette greased the rails to ride the roof of a passenger train. Kyle Railway sold their interests in the OP&E to Bohemia Incorporated in 1987, and the 19 returned to the Yreka Western in 1988. After the 19 returned to Yreka from Cottage Grove, the engine was in need of an overhaul to meet California boiler specifications, and the engine re-emerged to power the Yreka Western's famous Blue Goose excursion train in 1990. It was during this time period that the 19 and the Blue Goose excursion train became an institution synonymous with tourism in the Shasta Valley. In 2003, the 19 went down for overhaul for its annual FRA 15-year inspection. The engine re-emerged in 2006 to continue business as usual pulling the excursion train, as well as occasionally still pinch-hitting in freight service whenever the diesels were down for servicing. However, by the mid-2000s, with a downturning economy, 2008 ended up being the swan song for the 19 on the Yreka Western. On November 1, 2008, the Pacific Locomotive Association and the Northern California Railroad Club sponsored the Montague Mixed, an excursion running over the railroad from Yreka to Montague and back, with several photo run-bys along the way. This trip ended up being the last time the 19 would ever operate under steam over the Yreka Western, and here we see the engine making up its consist for the day in Yreka. 5 empty bulkhead flats are coupled onto the front of the regular excursion consist to make up the mixed train. The first photo run-by was held on Butcher Hill on the outskirts of Yreka. The second location is the Fyock Road grade crossing, and the 19 loses her feet in the first of a series of run-bys. The rolling farmland of the Shasta Valley is the next run-by location east of the Shasta River Bridge. last photo run-by on the way to Montague was performed at Pump House Hill. After dropping off the passengers in Montague and cutting off from the train, number 19 rolls to the end of the line for water and servicing. Water for the locomotive is provided by the Montague Fire Department located across the street. One last photo run-by is performed with the 19 as it pulls the excursion consist tender first on the western side of the Shasta River Bridge. After the Yreka Western sold McCloud 18 back to its original owner, it quickly was restored to operation to assist stablemate number 25 in excursion operations. In 2005, with the financial state of the McCloud waning, the 18 was sold to the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, who then leased it to the Sierra Railroad to operate on their Oakdale dinner train from 2007 to 2008. After its brief tenure on the Sierra Railroad, the 18 went to Virginia City, where it was rebuilt and returned to operation in 2011. The engine was recently returned to operation in 2021 after its second rebuild at the V&T. With the United States economy in a state of recession by the late 2000s, 2008 proved to be the last season for the Blue Goose excursion trains on the Yreka Western. After the Montague mixed excursion, the 19 was returned to the engine house at Yreka, where it sat waiting for its next call to service. With industry down due to the recession and the Central Oregon and Pacific closing the Siskiyou line, freight traffic quickly dried up. However, car storage was at a premium, and by 2009 there were cars stored all over the railroad. With moderate success due to car storage, by 2010 an attempt was made to restart the Blue Goose excursion trains, and an annual inspection was started on the 19. Track work also commenced, with several rail, tie, and bridge replacements all happening between Yreka and Montague. 19's original wooden pilot beam was considerably worn out by this time and was replaced with a steel one. Work on fixing the oil supply line from the tender to the engine commenced, and sandblasting and partial repaint work was also performed. However, by 2011, things were looking really bleak for the Yreka Western. From 2011 to 2012, scrapping of track and equipment was performed all over the railroad, as well as all the stored cars being removed. And by 2016, the final nail in the coffin was struck as the 19 was seized by Siskiyou County and auctioned off. The buyer was Jerry Joe Jacobson, owner of the Age of Steam Roundhouse out of Sugar Creek, Ohio, where the engine continues being worked on for its eventual return to operation. Today, the Yreka Western property languishes, mothballed and abandoned. However, for those who lived in and visited the Shasta Valley during the years that the Blue Goose excursion train ran, the stories, images, and memories of the little train out of Yreka will live on for generations to come.